Hi-ho there, neighbours. Hope everyone's well, and life is treating you well. I am fresh off of writing a blog post this week. I'm hoping to get back into the habit of doing that at least once a week. This week I tackled the concept of changing around 5th edition to do other experiences. So, 5th edition, I've been generally impressed with. It's a good edition of D&D. It is probably the best edition of D&D they've done so far. It has a lot of the things I like of previous editions, the various previous editions, without a lot of the things I didn't. And it has made a few tweaks of its own that I particularly like advantage and disadvantage. That said, any game has its own base assumptions, and it's a fantasy role-playing game, and I wanted to see if maybe we could do something different with it. Just sort of testing the waters of variation. Now, what inspired me here was the Adventures of Middle-earth role-playing game, the Player's Guide, that Cubicle 7 did. Now, I got around to reading that, and I like it overall. It's a good book. Great production values as far as the imagery, the layout, and so on. The rules are interesting, and they take 5th edition and change it around. They change around the races. They change around the classes. They introduce, instead of just races, they introduce cultures. And different cultures have different benefits. So they treat a couple of different elven types based off of their culture. The Shire is one culture. The dwarves are a culture. The Barlings, the Men of Dale, it's the Bardlings, I think, is what they're called. So there are a bunch of different cultures, and the different cultures have different sort of racial abilities. The classes are similar to the classes in D&D, but they are possess of very unique differences. Specifically, the sort of scholar class, which is roughly equivalent to a wizard or sort of along the lines of a cleric, but they don't cast spells because there are no spells, and that's an interesting change. There were a couple of other little changes that made me think, okay, this is an interesting rebuild of 5th edition for a purpose. The changes make perfect sense in a Tolkienian game. Tolkien does not translate well to just D&D. Believe it or not, Gandalf does not wander around tossing around fireballs and magic missiles. He doesn't cast spells to fly. He doesn't, do sprays of acid, no sonic blasts, no lightning bolts. None of those things are things that, the Gandalf, the most iconic of wizards in Tolkien, does. Most of his magic is very subtle. And he's probably the most powerful wizard in the setting. There are a few other wizards who are on par or may outstrip him a little bit, but none of them do those things either. If you get into the Silmarillion and some of the others, you start seeing some of the grander magics, but they're only suggested at. It's not it's not the same. So trying to translate Tolkien to D&D just doesn't work. The setting assumptions are different. So they changed their rules right up to match that. Anyways, this led me to thinking about, well, what other variations on 5th edition could you do that would make sense? And I decided to take that inspiration and a page from the book of White Star, which is an excellent sort of OSR spin-off, science fiction version of classic OSR D&D, the Sword and Wizardry rule set. It's done by James Spawn. It's quite nice. It's not for people who want a lot of systems, though, because it's a very rules-light setup. It's very much along the lines of original D&D. There's no skills. There's class and race are combined into a single thing. So these are important distinctions. But the idea struck me as, okay, well, let's try it with 5th edition. So I did a write-up on that. I think I'm going to keep doing it for a while. The thing that I find enjoyable about it is it's a nice mental exercise. This may never see the light of day as something I turn into a full-fledged thing, but as a mental exercise, it's quite entertaining. In my particular write-up, I did, here's how I got here, and here are the classes. I did the soldier, which is sort of a fighter equivalent, the scoundrel, which is sort of a rogue equivalent, the expert, which is very much like the scholar in Adventures of Middle-earth. It's very along the lines of a wizard, but without the spellcasting. And they have a bunch of abilities tied to their speciality. If they're a scientist, they can make stuff, and they can add things to other people's equipment and get the most out of their own equipments and add understanding to the world, not unlike the sort of bardic knowledge ability. And, that they're very much, in a game effect sense, all about adding buffs to other people and buffs to their own equipment. And you could do a medicine one, which is about healing and so on, and instead of casting spells, they just have a lot of different medicinal options they can do each turn. So they could give somebody a dose of something that would give them a short rest instantly, or a nano boost to help them heal faster, or something like that. And there would be a list of these options that they have, and they can do as many of them as they have. As long as they have a kit, they can do as many of them as they want. Now, none of these will spike as quickly as a cleric. I mean, there are not going to be any flame strikes or mass heals or anything like that. But they also don't have the restrictions of a cleric. They can do it as often as they want. So it sort of balances out, hopefully. I would need to work on it to make it really work out that way, but it should theoretically balance out. It also keeps you from having the mystic artillery curve that comes with D&D. You don't get that in this setup. There's also one for pilots, and this is the class you take, the class setup you take if you want to be a pilot, fighter pilot, commander of your own freighter, what have you, and it's filled with stuff to make your ship better, which is cool. Make your flying better. Anybody can fly a ship, but the pilot gets all the good stuff. Then there would be the transhuman. The transhuman is essentially a monk. It has all of the basic abilities of a monk. Without chi, it's more of a bioenergy thing, but still roughly the same, and they can choose different paths, either cyber or BioWare, and they're either the flesh or the chrome. I think that's a good dynamic to go with. And then there's some other options like a scion. I talked about a scion and how I would set up scions. So I started and I just did the classes. There are probably some other class ideas that come to mind, but I just did, here's a rough outline of the classes. The next time I blog, it'll be about races, and I'm just, I'm having fun with it. I have rambled way more than I intended to, but it was on my head, on my brain, which you would know if you were psychic. Just saying, you could be psychic. What am I thinking? Anyway, subscribe, like, share with all the people, and, go check out the Patreon if you can. I got a patron, finally. Yay, I have a patron. And he's awesome. He's got his own channel and such. I will actually link to his channel in the show notes down below. And I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving, and I will talk to you later.